This is every team in the Eastern Conference ranked into their tiers of title contention, and we begin here at Tier 6, what I'm calling playing the long game. In this tier, we've got the Washington Wizards and the Brooklyn Nets. If we're being blunt, tanking is the number one priority for both of these teams. Now, with the Wizards, I actually think they're in a slightly better spot to be competitive this season. They've brought in a few established vets like Chris Middleton and CJ McCollum, and while those kinds of players can absolutely win you some games, I think their real focus should be giving as many meaningful minutes as possible to the young guys, particularly Alex Sarr and their latest rookie pickup, Trey Johnson. It's about getting those reps in, letting youth develop, and laying some sort of foundation for the future. As for the Nets, I think they're going to be comfortably one of the worst teams in the league this season. Even though they did show a lot of fight last year, that roster has now been completely cleared of any veterans who might accidentally lift this team to a few extra wins. Guys like Dennis Schroeder, who were able to steady the younger group and still win, are no longer there. And because of that, I don't think Brooklyn are going to even need to try and tank. They're just going to lose a ton of games naturally. Cam Johnson was also a guy who was winning them games, and they dealt him for Michael Porter Jr., who hasn't had many opportunities to have the ball in his hands, so trying to get some high-level play out of him to then look to trade him at the deadline as he's an expiring contract is definitely a priority for Brooklyn this season. But for now, it's just about getting a good group of talent together as both of these teams try and lay the foundation for their futures. Now, in Tier 5, which I'm calling the forced gap year teams, we have the Boston Celtics and the Indiana Pacers. If you had told me that after last year's postseason that both the Pacers and the Celtics would be completely out of the title picture just one season later, I would have thought you were out of your mind. But then came two brutal Achilles injuries, Jason Tatum for Boston and Tyrese Halliburton for Indiana, and suddenly next season looks nothing like what either team had envisioned. And it's not just about losing your best player. These kinds of injuries ripple through every part of the franchise, shifting timelines, shaking confidence, and forcing decisions that maybe wouldn't have had to happen otherwise. Starting with Boston, their situation got tricky really fast. To stay under the cap, they basically had to cull half of the team. And sure, maybe they were going to make some of these tough calls anyway, just given how deep into the luxury tax that they were headed, but you could have more easily justified staying above that line if you still had a healthy championship core. You would have been perfectly fine being a first or even second apron team if you knew that Jason Tatum was leading a contender, but instead they're left with no choice but to reshape the roster. And the ironic part, the two players they just moved, Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, were the very two guys they brought in during the 2023 offseason to help them get over the top. And it worked. They helped to deliver that 2024 title. But just 2 seasons later, they're both gone. Holiday full circle back to Portland, and Porzingis now heading to Atlanta. What makes Boston so fascinating going forward is just how wide the range of outcomes is for their next chapter. If the retool works, if they find the right balance around Tatum once again when he's back, they could come back even stronger than ever. But if they get it wrong or mismanage this window, they might never quite get back to that 2024 level again. They're walking a very fine line between rebirth and regression. Then there's Indiana, who just went through one of the more unforgettable playoff runs we've seen in recent years, only to have it all come crashing down in the most brutal way imaginable. Game 7 of the NBA Finals. And to make it even worse, their franchise star, Tyrese Halliburton, tears his Achilles in that very game. That alone is absolutely soul-crushing. But then, just weeks later, longtime anchor Miles Turner leaves for a division rival and signs with the Milwaukee Bucks. Salt in the wound doesn't even begin to describe it. Halliburton's injury all but guarantees he will not see the floor next season, even if they find a way to make the playoffs. And what makes the Miles Turner departure sting even more is that he was so key to that finals run, not just as a rim protector, but as that stretch big who gave them floor spacing and the defensive presence that made their whole system work. Losing both your star playmaker and your defensive linchpin all in one off season is absolutely brutal. It knocks Indiana clean out of the contender conversation, at least for the time being. But here's the thing, I still don't think they're going to be bad. In fact, they might still be good enough to hang around the playoff picture. The rest of the team is still intact, and there's enough talent and chemistry that they can compete still, with guys like Pascal Siakam, Andrew Nembhard, and potentially some starting minutes for a guy like TJ McConnell. At the same time, you almost wonder if they'd be better off leaning into that gap year fully, trying to bottom out a little and positioning themselves for a top pick in the following draft. But either way, this feels like a one-year pause, a season to reset, and then come back in 2026 with a vengeance. With Halliburton back, a refreshed core, and maybe even a few upgrades, Indiana could very easily be right back in the thick of it. Alright, now we enter Tier 4, which I'm calling the will be competitive tier. And here, I've got 3 teams, the Toronto Raptors, Chicago Bulls, and Charlotte Hornets. All 3 of these squads have committed enough to their rosters to be taken seriously in what's shaping up to be a very soft Eastern Conference. But let's be real, expecting them to actually make playoff noise is already pushing it. And to expect one of these teams to win a series, that's probably the absolute ceiling for what any of these teams can hope to do in this upcoming season. Starting with the Raptors, they've been busy, particularly on the executive side. Firing their long-term general manager, Asai Ujiri, was a pretty major move. And while we still don't fully know what the shift will mean on the court, the front office clearly felt like something had to change. But the biggest swing that they've taken hasn't even been felt yet, and that was the addition of Brandon Ingram, a kind of move that fell under the radar because he didn't play a single game for them last season due to injury. So now we're just left imagining what this new core of Ingram, Scotty Barnes, and Emmanuel Quickley might look like, because we've literally never seen it in action. And to be honest, I'm not sure we should expect to be blown away by it either. Scotty Barnes as your potential number 1 option, for me, already comes with a pretty clear ceiling. And throwing another wing into the picture with Ingram, who also needs the ball to be effective, into that mix could really go either way. It could click and they could complement each other really nicely, or it could feel like these two guys are just stepping on each other's toes all season long. I genuinely thought the Raptors should have been better last season than what they actually were, and while I do expect them to make a step forward this season, now that there's more talent on the roster, I still just see far too many wings and not enough offensive punch to compete with the real teams in the East. Most likely, they'll be scrapping it out in the play-in tournament, hanging their hat on solid defensive effort, but I wouldn't expect much more than that. Then there's Chicago, and with the Bulls, the word that keeps coming to mind is uncertainty. The roster isn't locked in. Josh Giddey has still yet to be re-signed, and the trade rumors continue to swirl around this team. So there's a real chance they could look very different by the time opening night rolls around. That being said, I still don't think their floor or ceiling really changes all that much. Wherever they land, I think this is a team that will be competitive, but not much more than that. The backcourt pairing of Giddey and Kobe White was actually pretty fun to watch towards the end of last season, especially through March, when they were stacking up surprising wins. I do expect Giddey to re-sign pretty soon, and I'd be shocked if they moved on from Kobe White. The guy that I do expect to be moved, though, is Nikola Vucevic. He's been on the trading block for what feels like over a year now, and I'd be surprised if he's still in a Bulls jersey opening night next year. Swapping him out for picks or younger players who actually fit the timeline of this group would be ideal. And then of course there's the main piece, Matas Buzelis, the real wild card. He quietly had a really impressive rookie season last year and is probably their best long-term piece moving forward. All being said, I do like the direction Chicago's trending in, younger, faster and fresher. But as exciting as that youth movement is, is, the defensive side of the ball still feels like a real problem, and until they can figure that out, this team will just be stuck in the just competitive range, somewhere they've been for what feels like over a decade at this point. Not bad, not great, just in the middle. And then we've got Charlotte, who I'd probably rank first in this group because honestly, I really like what they've been quietly building. I think this should be a playoff or bust season for the Hornets. The East is weak enough, and the roster is finally strong enough that if they don't make it, there'll be serious questions needing to be answered over the offseason. Their biggest issue throughout the LaMelo Ball era has always been injuries. Every time they end up having a little bit of momentum, someone goes down. And last season, that was no different. But now, with some new firepower, namely the 4th overall pick, Con Knipple, and Colin Sexton coming over from Utah, they might finally be ready to turn the corner. This, in my opinion, is the most complete and talented roster Charlotte has had in this LaMelo era. He finally has some real help. The offensive burden doesn't all have to fall on his shoulders anymore, with guys like Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, Knipple, and Colin Sexton's ball handling all around him. The offensive end was a huge struggle for Charlotte last season, and that should open up a little next year. So, as long as they stay healthy, and that's the biggest if, then they should be aiming for at least a play-in tournament appearance, and really, they should be making the playoffs. I think they can do it, and if they do, their franchise will be heading in the right direction. But if not, I'd expect serious changes in the following off-season. Alright, now we've entered Tier 3, which I'm calling could cause real damage. And in this group, I've got the Orlando Magic, the Philadelphia 76ers, and of course, the Miami Heat. Starting with Orlando, a team that a lot of people seem to be much higher on than I am. And here's why. There's no denying that perimeter shooting was a huge weakness for them last season. That was the most obvious hole in their game. So yes, trading for Desmond Bane certainly helps to address that area on paper. He's a very good three-point shooter, but I think people are underestimating just how complicated his fit will actually be. Shooting wasn't Orlando's only issue. Touches and usage were a problem as well, particularly between Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. That became crystal clear when Banchero missed time. Franz suddenly looked like a superstar, averaging nearly 30 points a game. But then, when Paolo came back, Franz's role shrunk, and he just wasn't able to be the same kind of player when he wasn't getting nearly as many touches. Now, they're throwing in Bane into that mix, another guy who likes to create and wants the ball in his hands, and I just think it creates more problems than it's going to solve. Let's be honest. You don't give up 4 first-round picks for someone to just stand in the corner and wait for kickouts. And if that's what they actually end up asking Bane to do, then this is a terrible move. Because if he wanted that kind of player, somebody like Luke Kennard would have made a lot more sense. That is the role he plays. But instead, Orlando assembles a big three, Paolo, Franz, and Bane, who all want to create, all want to handle the ball, and all want to be involved offensively in a major way. That kind of dynamic rarely works unless it's perfectly balanced, and I'm still not convinced it will be. Now, to be fair, they still have some great defensive pieces and solid role players, and they are young enough that they will have some nights where everything does click and they look really dangerous. But overall, I just don't think this Bane trade pushes them as far forward as people think. They'll be competitive, dangerous when they can catch fire, but I'm just not sure if this was the right move long term. Then there's Philadelphia, a team that looked like they were falling apart early in the season. Alarm bells were going off everywhere. The defense looked lifeless, Embiid went down with another serious injury, and their big-time free agency addition of Paul George just didn't look like the same guy. But what looked like the total collapse actually opened the door for something else, a mini reset. By essentially punting the second half of the season, they landed the 3rd overall pick. And with it, they drafted VJ Edgecombe, who's drawn comparisons to a Jimmy Butler x Dwayne Wade hybrid. That might seem a little bit over the top, but his mix of strength, athleticism, and intensity is no joke. Also, his first game in the NBA Summer League looked very promising, as I think he's going to be a real difference maker very quickly. Add in Tyrese Maxey, who continues to take massive leaps, and don't forget about Jared McCain, who looked incredible early last season before an injury shut him down for the rest of the year. And suddenly, Philly's outlook isn't nearly as grim. If Embiid can return and look anything close to what he was before, then this is a team that can absolutely cause some trouble in the playoffs, and maybe should even be in the tier above. I think the days of peak Joel Embiid are probably over, as his injuries have been serious, and they just keep piling up. But even 80% of him with this young core could be enough to really scare some teams in the playoffs. What's interesting here is that they've basically stumbled into a 2-timeline build, which I usually hate. Most of the time, 2 timelines means you're not fully committed in either direction. But in Philly's case, I actually kind of like it. Maxey, Edgecombe, and McCain, that's a young group that you can certainly get behind, and now they're no longer solely reliant on Embiid's health to stay relevant. The Sixers feel way more stable than they did even just a few months ago, as what started out to be a horror show of a season turned into a blessing in disguise. And then we have the Miami Heat, the team that is always in this tier. The Heat are just built for chaos. They might end up being a 6 to 10 seed, but the moment they make the playoffs, they are dangerous. And now, finally, Pat Riley seems to have emerged from his off-season hibernation and made a really good trade for Norman Powell, where they basically just threw together a couple of small veteran deals and a second-round pick, obtaining a guy who was nearly an all-star last year. But whether or not he and Tyler Hero can actually play together effectively is still up in the air. Neither are real playmakers, so there's a very real chance that the backcourt turns into a your turn, my turn situation, which isn't ideal for a team that thrives off rhythm and unselfishness. Defensively, I think they'll once again be very solid, the top half of the league at least. And with the Jonathan Kuminga rumors still circling, there's a chance that they aren't done making moves yet. If they can somehow manage to pull off a Kuminga trade, that would be fantastic. The other big move was shipping Jimmy Butler to Golden State for Andrew Wiggins at the deadline, and that was a move that just had to happen. The Jimmy Butler era had run its course in Miami, and the question is whether Wiggins will actually be on this roster long term, or if he's potentially flipped again, possibly for Kuminga. Either way though, with or without Kuminga, I still can't quite see Miami being any more than a tier 3 team next season. Now we enter tier 2, which I'm calling not to be taken lightly. In this group, I've got the Atlanta Hawks, Milwaukee Bucks, and Detroit Pistons. Starting with Atlanta. Hawks fans, it's time to celebrate. You're finally out of play-in hell. I really believe that this year, Atlanta cements itself as a proper, legitimate playoff team. Not just for this season, but for years to come. They were one of the more obvious winners of the offseason so far, landing Kristaps Porzingis in a trade, and then signing Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Luke Kennard to patch up some of last year's holes. What I really like about this group is the flexibility. The front court pairing of Porzingis and Jalen Johnson has a serious upside, especially when you think about how well KP can space the floor and protect the paint. Then, a potential backcourt lineup with Dyson Daniels and Alexander Walker would be able to wreak havoc defensively on the perimeter. And then, of course, the Trae Young Porzingis pick and pop is going to be an action that no defense is going to want to have to deal with, as there's just going to be too much space and too many options, especially when you start thinking about Johnson cutting back door, or even Dyson Daniels appearing at the nail for a floater. Getting Jalen Johnson back healthy is going to be a massive boost as well. Before his injury last season, he genuinely emerged as a most improved player candidate, averaging nearly 19 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists on 50% shooting. He's basically the ideal guy to pair with Trae Young. He's athletic, has great downhill speed, can handle the ball in transition, and has developing playmaking and a jumper that are all coming along as well. Once that shot fully lands, watch out. This, in my opinion, is by far the best team Trae Young has ever had around him, which also means the pressure is now fully on his shoulders to deliver. Last year, his shooting dipped. Young shot just 34% from deep and 41% from the field overall, while averaging 24.2 points per game. But where he really took a step forward was as a playmaker. He led the league with 11.6 assists per game and had some genuinely elite stretches of passing. Yes, the 4.7 turnovers per game do stand out, but when you're doing basically everything on the offensive end for your team, those are the kinds of numbers that come with that territory. Now though, with some real help around him, Trae might not have to be the guy making every single decision offensively for the team. For me, his biggest focus this season has to be getting back to being a deadly shooter. If he can do that and everything else around him clicks, I wouldn't be surprised to see Atlanta go on a deep playoff run. Something similar to what we just saw Indiana do, as I really like what they've been building. Now, let's talk about the Milwaukee Bucks, who have been the center of the NBA media circus lately. Everyone has their take on what they've done this offseason, and I actually went into way more detail in a separate video, but let's break it down here quickly. For me, considering the corner Milwaukee had backed themselves into, this offseason was a huge success. They had very little flexibility, looked set to lose a bunch of key players, and yet somehow managed to retain Bobby Portis, Gary Trent Jr., Kevin Porter Jr., Ryan Rollins, and Taurean Prince, all on extremely friendly team deals. That alone was impressive, but of course, the biggest headline was waiving and stretching Damian Lillard's contract over the next 5 seasons to pay him roughly $22.5 million annually through to 2030 in order to sign free agent big man Miles Turner away from the rival Indiana Pacers. The reaction to that decision has been wild. A lot of people have been acting like Milwaukee had a clear choice and just fumbled, but that is not the case. Truthfully, this was the better of two tough options. Lillard wasn't coming back next year, and they had no starting center with Brook Lopez walking. Signing Turner was an absolute necessary. He's one of the few bigs in this league who can truly complement Giannis. He protects the rim, spaces the floor, and an added bonus is that he can play with pace. The last part is key because Milwaukee's whole style was shifting towards the end of last year. To close out the regular season without Lillard, they actually looked better. They won 8 straight games by putting the ball in Giannis's hands, surrounding him with quality shooters, and just letting him play point guard, getting downhill, collapsing the defense, and kicking it out. It was simple basketball, but incredibly effective, allowing him to put up some ungodly numbers. That will be their game plan next year. Go faster, spread the floor, and lean into Giannis being the most unstoppable open court player in the league. Turner fits that system way better than Lopez ever could. And now, with all of these younger guys still in the mix, AJ Green, KPJ, Trent Jr., and Rollins, they've got the energy, shooting, and upside to make it work. This is going to be a very different looking Bucks team next year, but honestly, I think they are a better one. If health is on their side, which has been an issue over the last couple of seasons, I think they should make a pretty deep playoff run, at least getting to the second round. And finally, we've got the Detroit Pistons. Probably the most slept-on team in the entire Eastern Conference right now. People seem to have already forgotten just how historic last season was for them. Detroit became the first team in NBA history to triple their win total from one season to the next. Then in the playoffs, they pushed New York all the way to a Game 6. And if it wasn't for a 21-0 run and a very questionable no-call late in that series, they actually might have pulled it off. And keep in mind, that same Knicks team went on to beat the reigning champions in round 2. So Detroit's performance wasn't some fluke. It showed just how open the East really is and how quickly things can change. What makes Detroit even more scary is how they didn't even have Isaiah Stewart or Jaden Ivey in that playoff series. 2 guys who are very important to their core. Add them back into the mix, and this team gets a whole lot better. On top of that, they picked up sharpshooter Duncan Robinson in free agency, who's going to give Cade Cunningham the kind of spacing he's never really had before. The Pistons were already solid defensively last year, but what stood out down the stretch was just how much their offense was clicking as well. From the new year onwards, they were pushing the pace, turning defense into offense, and became one of the best fast break teams in the entire league, playing very similar to what the Oklahoma City Thunder did to win a championship. I'll be honest, I'm really high on the Pistons, and I don't think they get nearly enough media time. Given what they just did, how young and deep they are, along with how much room they still have to grow and develop, I genuinely believe they're knocking on the door of Tier 1. They're not quite there yet, but don't be surprised if they crash the party sooner than expected. Alright, now we've finally entered Tier 1 of our Eastern Conference contenders, and this tier is called the Conference Contenders. And yes, if you just noticed that I said conference contenders and not title contenders, that was very much intentional. Let's not dance around it. While I think both of these teams, the Cleveland Cavaliers and the New York Knicks, do have a real shot at winning the East, I just don't see either of them hoisting the trophy at the very end. Now, it is not impossible, but right now, I'd say it's pretty unlikely. Still, they're clearly ahead of the rest of the pack in the East, and if anybody is going to break through and win the championship from the East, it would be one of these two. Now, let's start off with New York. And look, I know some people are still riding the wave of their big second round win against Boston, but if we're being real, even they seemed unsure about just how legitimate it actually was. Firing Tom Thibodeau just weeks after making the conference finals was a pretty loud signal that the front office saw cracks under the surface. Because when you go back and actually watch that Boston series, the Celtics were ice cold from deep in the first two games, then lost their best player to an Achilles injury. Yet, the Knicks were still getting outplayed for long stretches. They were down 20 points in both of the first two games to a team that couldn't buy a bucket. That's not exactly a glowing endorsement for your performance. A big part of the issue was the lineups. All season long, Josh Hart was starting at the 4, and honestly, I don't think it ever worked. His skill set just does not complement the rest of the starting group, and you could see it clear as day every game. He'd be parked in the corner on offense, where he's the least effective, rather than handling the ball and creating, something that he's been pretty good at. Really, I think he should have been the team's 6th man all along. I'd personally love to see Deuce McBride step into that starting 5 next year and give them a more natural balance. And thankfully, it sounds like change is coming. New head coach Mike Brown recently said, quote, "I'm looking forward to putting a plan in place and working with these guys on both ends of the floor. I love their length and I love their versatility," Brown said. And for me, I think that quote says a lot. It tells me that we're going to see adjustments, not just in rotation, but in the overall approach of the team. And that's just the thing with the Knicks. Their ceiling is ridiculously high if they make the necessary tweaks. Mikal Bridges is someone who I want to see become a much larger part of the offense next year. Last season, it felt like he was just getting the scraps. Shots here and there, nothing really consistent. And for me, I believe he's far too good for that. He can create, he can defend, and he needs to be integrated in their offensive structure, not just, here you go Mikal, go get us a bucket. Because he's not that type of a scorer. Mike Brown's mention of versatility makes me think he sees that as well. If New York embraces that versatility and shifts toward a more dynamic, balanced system instead of being so Brunson-centric on offense, then I'll gladly rethink their title chances. But until I actually see these changes in action, I can't fully put them into my true title conversation just yet, no matter how good their regular season record might be. Then there's Cleveland, and while their issues are kind of similar, I do believe they're a better team overall, and here's why. They simply have more talent, and that talent is still on the rise. Evan Mobley just won the Defensive Player of the Year and just continues to level up every season. If he can even take a small leap next year, say just a 10% improvement offensively, that could completely shift their ceiling dramatically. But the thing that really holds Cleveland back is just how much they change their identity when the playoffs playoffs roll around. In the regular season, it's team basketball, scoring coming from up and down the roster. But the second the playoffs start, it becomes the Donovan Mitchell show once again. And it isn't just a Cavs problem. It's been a pattern on every Mitchell-led team he's ever been on. He goes into a bit of a tunnel vision once the playoffs start, taking more shots than usual. And yeah, when he's hot, it's electric. He can drop 40 plus and win you a game single-handedly. He's that good. But when he's not hitting, or even when he is, it throws the rest of the team completely off rhythm. Guys aren't getting their usual looks. They're not involved, and when it is crunch time and the ball finally swings their way, they're ice cold because they haven't touched it in over 5 minutes. To me, the Cavaliers have two clear options. Either stick with their regular season style even when the playoffs start, keep the ball moving, keep everyone involved, or lean more into a Donovan Mitchell-centric offense during the regular season, so that by the playoffs roll around, the rest of the team is a little bit more used to that style. But what they can't do next year is flip-flop between the two and hope that it's just going to work out, because so far it hasn't. All that said, I still think Cleveland is the best team in the Eastern Conference. The Cavaliers got crushed by injuries in the second round, and who knows, if they had a healthy Garland, Mobley, and Hunter, they could have beaten Indiana. Now, that's obviously speculation, but it just shows you how close they already were. And with the way the East is shaping up, I think they're in the best position to take advantage of the opportunity. Because let's be honest, the path to a finals appearance is far easier in this conference than it has been for a very long time. But even if one of these teams does manage to make it through, the truth is the champion is probably coming out of the West. That is where the best teams in the league are, and that's where the real battle is going to be decided. And if you want to hear every team in the Western Conference broken down and ranked into their tiers of title contention, then you can check out that full breakdown video right now.